Hello, and welcome to another episode of St. Andrews Reads. I'm Mackenzie, and I am a historical interpreter here at the St. Andrews Rectory. I am in anthropology and history at the U of M and U of W, University of Manitoba and University of Winnipeg. And today I'll be reading the book, or an excerpt from the book, Women of the Red River by W.J. Healy. It's a book that's written about recollections of women surviving in the Red River era, and we are going to flip to, in my book, page 216. So this book kind of goes over a bunch of different women that have survived throughout the Red River era and kind of retells some stories of these women that were found in letters sent back and forth between different people. So one common character in this whole story is Mrs. Cohen. And Mrs. Cohen, her husband, I can't remember his name unfortunately, but he ran Lower Fort Garry. And so he was the governor of Lower Fort Garry, so she was a very high-class woman. So in the excerpt that we are reading today, it was sent on March 12th in 1848, and it was sent by, let's see here, it was sent by John Bunn. And it is about a young woman named Caroline Pruden, who we do talk about here at the Rectory. And you can actually find her information online as well. She was a very well-known woman in the Red River settlement, and she's known for being one of the beauties of the Red River at the time. So the excerpt just kind of talks about, well, I'll read it to you instead, and you can figure out what it's about. So, Red River, March 12th, 1848. Donald Ross, Esquire, Chief Factor, Norway House. My dear sir, I am happy to find that notwithstanding the mountains of drift in which we are entombed, all communication from the outer world is not entirely closed. Such a winter for wind, snow, drift, and turbulence would induce one to believe that the devil himself rides on the whirlwind and directs the storm. Or perhaps Mother Nature is willing that only part of her children should enjoy the pleasure and frolics of the season, and likes to see the snow gyrating in the polka or rushing in the gallopade to the musical whistling of old Boris. To describe the balls that have been and those that are to be is a task beyond the weakness of human nature. A mere enumeration would be a Herculean labor, but the ball is past like the feast of O'Rourke. 'Twill ne'er be forgot by those who were there and those who were not. My muse is not adequate to a description of all that has been seen and felt on the occasion, and what I can, I will do. The lady patroness was in full bloom, radiant in silk and gold, and the gems of Ophir, her face benign like the harvest moon, and as round all smiles and perfection, except now and then a thundercloud of a threatened storm, but one cannot always expect sunshine. The room was the most tastefully decorated with stars and emblematic of those branches of service here stationed, and the motto of the Garter in each center. Elegant festoons of evergreens were appropriately placed, and orchestra was neatly ornamented with the royal's initials. So at this time, I would like to say quickly that this letter was probably written about, so as we know, it was written in the 12th of March, 1848. It was probably describing some sort of Yule ball based on the elements of evergreens. So a lot of things that we talk about here at the rectory, and that's part of my job, is explaining what life was like in Victorian era or 1800s, especially on the Red River, because life was not as refined as it might have been in England. So people were really living off the grid here until, of course, we get more boats coming in and more settlers. So to continue. The amusements commenced by Dr. Buchan's choir, singing a stanza of God Save the Queen, and then Here's a Health to All Good Lasses. And they further added to the enjoyment of the evening by occasionally interspersing some choice songs and glees, which were sung in a style hitherto unheard by the echoes of Rupert's Land. Rupert's Land, by the way, was what Canada was called before it was actually called Canada. So, fun fact. To continue. Mrs. Caroline Pruden and Margaret and Harriet Sinclair were, I believe, considered the belles of the evening. Mrs. Lohman was held to be below rather than above par, and this, of course, gave gripes to Mama. Polkas, gallops, waltzes, quadrilles, cantillons, country dances, reels, and jigs enjoyed the heels and talents of the assembly. There were cards for the infirm and lazy brandy and tobacco for the thirsty and unremitting hospitality to all. At midnight there was an elegant spread consisting of all delicacies nature and art could afford, to which ample justice was done. At its close, my memory expired. All became hiccups and happiness, delightful and indistinct visions wrapped the senses in bliss. A faithful version is lost to the world. Words are too weak to convey any picture of the heavenly trance, this strange mixture of celestial music, such as mortal's ear never heard, a melody of warriors and angels, mortals whirling, drapery flying, masculine legs fitting to feminine ladies. Now and then an ankle, small and clean, turned would be crossed by a good sound piece of understanding, which, if not appropriate to the Venus de Medici, would have done honor to the Mullinger heifer. I remember for some moments being enraptured with the contemplation of the cherubim, and an imagination was gloating upon its fat proportions. A shake aroused me. I found myself staring at the lady patroness. So he was staring at the lady patroness. He's describing the scenes of this ball basically being like that you would find in fine art. So something that a lot of Victorian people liked was kind of Renaissance-y art. So Renaissance Italy, where there was very beautiful bodies and very beautiful scenes. That's something that was very common. So we left off where he's staring at the lady patroness. But such frivolity cannot endure. Next day brought headaches and recollections. I looked back upon the evening with pleasure, as it afforded unmingled gratification to the guests, and so satisfied the hospitable donors and riveted the good feeling which ought to exist between the civilians and their very gentlemanly and kind military friends. It is not at all unlikely that some of the fair and lovely ones may suffer from scarlet fever, but none will perish. It, however, would appear that more than one has been bitten by a tarantula, since a few days ago Mrs. Mowat gave a fashionable ball and supper, and Mrs. Bird came out strong on the evening of the 16th INST. I don't know what that means. It's probably instance, but I'm not 100% sure. So I just figured I'd insert that there because I'm not 100% sure. What took place at the Moats or what took place at the Birds, I am personally ignorant of. Since having declined to be present at either, I must depend on the liberality of others. I love gaiety, but I would eschew deception where the line of demarcation ought to be made is, of course, a matter of opinion, but having reached my own, there I shall stop. Had the persons reserved their fire, they might have preserved their character for good sense and maintained their pastoral authority. But they railed at dancing as a damnable sin, which no lady would believe. And now, when they might say something about the abuse thereof, their ammunition is gone. They have fired a few peppercorns from the pulpit about Lot's wife, the rich man, and Lazarus, etc., etc. But it is sparrow shot against a basseton, quoth my Uncle Toby. Papas may remonstrate, parsons may dispense brimstone by the wholesale, but the girls will dance. Vive la bagatelle is the order of the day. But the fever will pass, reaction will come, and pensiveness and sighing will lower the dear little creatures down to the humdrum realities of everyday life. We are looking forward with hope at more favorable seasons. The abundance of snow gives promise of lacking moisture. This is very true for nowadays. Is he describing back then or is he describing now? Because I sure know that in February, when I'm filming this, it's pretty snowy. So, and we're definitely not going to be lacking any moisture this year. Should we be disappointed, there will be no recourse for us but to whet our teeth upon our livestock, and when it is gone, to live like pike in a pond. Of grain there is hardly sufficient to meet the wants of a lucky few who are holders. The masses are destitute of it, yet with the astonishing and flexible resources of this singular country, a remedy against starvation is found in the swarms of rabbits, and in and around the settlement, and the superabundance of deer of various kinds in its vicinity. We too are fated to be, as always, embarrassed, but never bankrupt, to feel the pangs of hunger, but never the languor of starvation. Remember me kindly to the ladies, young and old, and to my Mr. Clouston, who is too happy to write me. I am too lazy to write him. Ever yours very truly, John Bunn. So, in the next, on the next page, the last page of this little section here, is just a little bit of a like a conclusion to the letter. But I think it's worth noting that during this time, as we see in the later version of his letter, he's talking about how like crops hadn't really worked out in previous seasons. And this is something that we see happen quite frequently in the Red River. So I'll just read this last little page. The Dr. Duncan mentioned in the letter was the musical medical officer whose ingenuity in constructing the first organ used in St. Boniface Cathedral is spoken of by Mrs. Cohen, who has always also told on an earlier page of this book that Peter Pruden, Caroline Pruden's father, in his displeasure with his daughter Caroline because she danced the polka. Then a novelty took her home while the ball was still going on in Fort Garry on that March 75 years ago. So, Caroline Pruden and her father in this story, she went to a ball with her stepmother and a couple of her lady friends, and she had been learning the polka. The polka had actually just been recently introduced to the Red River settlement from New York, and she desperately wanted to dance this dance. Her father had forbidden her, but she showed it to her stepmother, who said it was okay. So that night, Caroline Pruden disobeyed her father and began dancing the polka. Her father found out, was completely displeased, and that is how Caroline Pruden actually earned the nickname of Miss Disobedience in the Red River settlement. But she still got a husband, and she still got married, and she still lived a happy life. And she was considered one of the most beautiful girls in the Red River settlement, and it is said that her beauty actually followed her all the way through to her old age. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures to show you of her, but I do think that there are a couple pictures within the book that I could show you, if we can see them. So, there is a little photo, just right at the end of our chapter, just of a young lady wearing a nice fancy dress, probably a dress that would have been worn at the time, just right there. So yeah, so thank you for joining us today, and hopefully you will tune in next time for another St. Andrews Reads. Thanks, bye.